Shabbos Daf Zayin. We're continuing with the brisa that describes the four domains, the four rishuyos: Rishus Harabim, Rishus Hayachid, carmelis, and Makom Ptur. While describing a carmelis, the brisa brings an example of a bika. A bika is a valley, a large field. So we're saying that a bika is a carmelis, but on the other hand, the Mishnah tells us that a bika is considered a Rishus Hayachid 3 out of 4 times, and the other time it's considered Rishus Harabim. In other words, in the summer, we consider it Rishus Hayachid if somebody carries from a bika into Rishus Harabim, he's chayiv. And in the winter, if somebody carries from there, he's chayiv. And when it comes to Tumah, a bika is considered a Rishus Hayachid, but in the summer, it's considered a Rishus Harabim. What does that mean? Tumah has a special halacha that if you have a suffix Tumah, you have a doubt whether this thing is Tameh, you are Tameh, you look at where you are. If you're in Rishus Harabim, you are Tahar. If you're in Rishus Hayachid, you are Tameh. And why is that? Because we learn from a Saita. Saita, a woman who's secluded with another man, there are no other people there. So if it's in Rishus Harabim, there are people, and therefore you are tar. So in this case, or only in this case, in the summer, there are some people that go off the beaten path and they go into the field, and therefore it's not considered a Rishus Hayachid. For Tumah, it's rather considered a Rishus Harabim. The question remains though, we're calling this bika a Rishus Hayachid. Sometimes it's Rishus Harabim, but never do we call a bika a carmelis. So why does the brisa call a bika a carmelis? The Gemara brings 2 answers. Ula says, in fact, it is a carmelis. Just in regarding Tumah, there's a Rishus Hayachid and Rishus Harabim. And that's why we call it a Rishus Hayachid versus a Rishus Harabim. But halachically, it's actually a carmelis. Rav Ashi doesn't like that answer because it says specifically it's a Rishus Hayachid. Says Rav Ashi, because we're discussing a specific case of a very large field that's enclosed with a fence. And that creates a Rishus Hayachid d'oraisa. However, midrabanan, you're not allowed to walk in that Rishus Hayachid for Amos because it's very similar to a Rishus Harabim. While describing this carmelis, there's 3 cases plus a carmelis. In other words, the brisa says yam, a sea, a bika, a valley, istavanis, benches, vik carmelis. But we are describing carmelis. So what does this extra word vik carmelis come to tell us? A special case of keren zavas b'Rishus Harabim. If there are houses lined up on the Rishus Harabim, and one of the houses is set back. Now, people could actually go from the Rishus Harabim into that setback, but they don't. They don't like using that. Therefore, that area is not considered Rishus Harabim, but rather it's considered a carmelis. Rabbi Yochanan says, in those days, in the middle of the highway, they would have a pillar, and people would hang their goods on it to sell. Says Rabbi Yochanan, the area of these amudim, these pillars, is considered a carmelis. It's difficult to maneuver between them. You could, but you don't. Says Rabbi Yehuda, the benches that are in front of these pillars, they are considered a carmelis, meaning that the beams are not a carmelis, because you could maneuver if you want to, but you cannot drive over a bench. But Rabbi Yochanan, who says that the pillars are a carmelis, certainly he would agree that the benches are a carmelis. The Gemara discusses a case where a person takes a sticky object, like a wet fig, or silly putty, whatever it is, and he throws it 4 amas in Rishus Harabim, and it lands on a wall. He is chayiv because he transferred an object 4 amas. Now, if it lands on top of the wall, on top of this Makom Ptur, you have like a stone in the middle of Rishus Harabim. How do we view any object in the middle of Rishus Harabim? Could it cancel the Rishus Harabim? Says the Gemara, if this stone is 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim, and 3 tefachim high, then it becomes a Makom Ptur. And if the fig lands on top of this object, this stone, then he's potter. If it lands on the side of the object, of the stone, then he's chayiv, because it's considered as if it landed in Rishus Harabim, whereas if it landed on top, it landed in a Makom Ptur, and he's potter. Now, what about thorns that are less than 3 tefachim? People don't like to step on thorns. Does it cancel out Rishus Harabim? It's machlokes in the Gemara. What about waste? No one wants to step on dog waste. Says the Gemara, it's considered by most as a Makom Ptur. However, Rav Ashi says you can't start canceling out Rishus Harabim when you feel like and say this item is cancels it, this doesn't, and therefore he says anything that's less than 3 tefachim high is batal to the Rishus Harabim, is part of Rishus Harabim, and it doesn't cancel, doesn't become a Makom Ptur. The Gemara says when Chachamim invented the concept called carmelis, they took the best halacha from Rishus Hayachid and the most kula halacha from Rishus Harabim, and they brought in the carmelis. And they said, just like in Rishus Hayachid, there's a special halacha that in order to be Rishus Hayachid, you have to be at least 4 tefachim. So too, a carmelis must be at least 4 tefachim. Anything less than 4 tefachim is still considered a Makom Ptur.
And just like in Rosh Hashanah, it only extends the Rosh Hashanah up to 10 tefachim. Anything above 10 tefachim is a makom p'tur. So too in a carmelit, anything above 10 tefachim is a makom p'tur. However, Rosh Hashanah, we know, can extend all the way to the sky. You have a giant pole. On top of that pole, it could be 100 tefachim, will still be considered a Rosh Hashanah. Gemara brings an interesting case. A person has a house. Some might call it a dog house. Very short, only 3 feet tall, let's say, less than 10 tefachim. But the exterior walls actually are 10 tefachim because if you count the roof and everything, you have 10 tefachim. Inside that house, everything is a carmelit. Above the house, it's all a Rosh Hashanah because you have 4 by 4 tefachim, and you have lower walls, and we use a concept called gud asik mechitzta. The walls on the side extend halachically upwards and create a wall that is 10 tefachim tall. Now, what happened if that person decided he would like to use the house and he'd like to dig down into the ground and create more than 10 tefachim height in the center of the house? But the side of the house, the side of the room, is less than 10 tefachim. Says the Gemara, the entire house turns into Rosh Hashanah because of the concept called chayrei Rosh Hashanah ki Rosh Hashanah. The holes in Rosh Hashanah are like Rosh Hashanah. The shelves that are in the walls of Rosh Hashanah have a halacha of Rosh Hashanah. So anything that's less than 10 tefachim is considered a shelf and therefore has halacha of Rosh Hashanah. What about shelves in Rosh Hashanah? You build a wall to separate Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah, and there's a shelf in the wall. What halacha does that have? According to Abaya, it's considered a Rosh Hashanah. Why? Because people benefit from it. They like to use that shelf. According to Rava, it's not like a Rosh Hashanah. And Rava asks Abaya, didn't we just say before that Keren Zavis and Rosh Hashanah, when there's a setback to a house that's considered a carmelit and not a Rosh Hashanah? Says Abaya, in that case, no one likes to use that setback. But shelves, everybody wants to use a shelf, and therefore it has halacha of a Rosh Hashanah. Now, going back to that case where somebody threw a sticky object on a wall, we're talking about a case where there's no hole in the wall. Because if there's holes in the wall, then even if you threw it above 10 tefachim, it should be considered Rosh Hashanah. And if you might tell me, well, it's not considered Rosh Hashanah because it doesn't have 4 by 4 at that hole. Well, there's a concept called chagikim. And we go according to Rameir. Rameir says that anytime you have a hole that's less than 4 by 4, I halachically carve out a 4 by 4 area. Have a wonderful day.